What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Fallout video, and today I figured I could discuss some of the things that I think were good about Fallout 76. Obviously, there are a plethora of videos across YouTube that go over why 76 is a bad game, and while I think Fallout 76 could definitely be considered a tactical flub, I do think there are a number of things that Fallout 76 actually did fairly well amongst all of the numerous and undesirable aspects of the game. Also, and before we jump in here, be sure to smash like for FLUB, as it is a pretty funny word, and also let me know some of the things that you think are good things about Fallout 76, if there are any, in the comment section below. Otherwise, and in no particular order, let's just go ahead here and start with the first thing I want to talk about, which is Fallout 76's Explore, Combat, and Gathering gameplay loop. So this gameplay loop is something that Fallout 76 shares with Fallout 4, and if you had to ask me why I think people like Fallout 76 and are playing it, I would say this is why. There's actually a really great video on this that I will be linking in the video's description, but the gist of the whole gameplay loop goes like this. In Fallout 4 and 76, the player explores, which usually involves heading to an undiscovered location or involves taking on a quest which leads you to an undiscovered location. You engage in some combat, which involves the player defeating any enemies that are present, and finally, you gather something, whether that be a quest item, raw materials for crafting, or anything else you might want. This formula then repeats once the player returns to their base to store the items they gathered, or after they turn in a quest item to an in-game character or an in-game object. This gameplay loop, despite its many misgivings, which I think directly and indirectly contributed to a number of reasons why many dislike Fallout 76, isn't of itself addictive and potentially enjoyable. Skyrim and Fallout 4 featured it, and those games are well regarded, well reviewed, and they sold a bunch of copies. I think the difference is that 76 is really only this gameplay loop with multiplayer thrown in and without many of the other things that people liked about Bethesda titles, like interesting characters, the feeling that the player is at the center of the story, and of course the ability to make your own game by modding it to tailor the experience to you personally. Ultimately, I think this gameplay loop can be enjoyable, and thus, that's why you hear about people playing Fallout 76 for 900 hours, only for them to get banned for having too much ammo. Which is, in its own way, pretty hilarious. Number 2. The game world. Despite some issues with the engine having pop-in, I don't think there's any denying that the Fallout 76 game world is a remarkable improvement when compared to the likes of Fallout 4. In fact, I would consider one of Fallout 4's greatest flaws to be the grayish-tan environments that all sort of just blend in with one another, despite some of the variety that is present. I think the best example of this is Fallout 4's swamps in the southern part of that game's map, where the grayish-tan colors make the swamp seem more like a continuation of the rest of the in-game areas, rather than something with its own distinct identity. Fallout 76, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem. Whether it's the irradiated wastelands up and around Grafton, the reddish cranberry bog near Watoga, or even some of the forests that you see during the beginning of the game, many of Fallout 76's locations are much more distinct. Add on the fact that the size of the map is basically 4 times the size of Fallout 4, and you have a pretty big and interesting area full of different places to explore. If you ask me, this is something that Fallout 76 definitely has over Fallout 4, and having more varied world design and biomes is something that I hope we see more of in the future. Number 3. Setting and location. Now, while I suppose this entry could really be an extension of the last one, I do think that Fallout 76 has one of the better and more interesting settings out of all of the Fallout games released so far. While the time period in which 76 takes place isn't really taken advantage of as well as it could or should have been from a lore perspective, the decision to set the game in Appalachia was a great idea. After all, and up to this point, most of the previous games in the series have taken place in either deserts or wastelands, and finally being able to play a Fallout game that takes place in a forest is pretty cool. Plus, and if you're someone that's already fairly familiar with many of the locations in West Virginia, I have to imagine it was pretty cool to finally experience some of these places in a video game. I also have to imagine it works great in reverse too, as the player can visit something like Camden Park in-game, and then visit the real-world Camden Park and gain a further appreciation of it. Perhaps this could also be said of Fallout 4 to some degree, as you can visit certain places like Bunker Hill in-game and in real life, But I think 76 has a leg up in Fallout 4 in that many of these locations are quirkier, with the Mothman Museum and Palace of Gold coming to mind. All in all, the location of Appalachia or West Virginia was a great idea and was executed well, even if other aspects of the game were executed poorly. Number 4. Infrequent multiplayer encounters. Aside from the issue with the final main mission, which requires the player to take on the Scorchbeast Queen in a group, I like how the vast majority of the rest of the game doesn't require much co-op multiplayer and that you can play it much like you would any other single-player Bethesda RPG. While I do think this does contribute to making the game feel a little more lonely, I'd rather have less player interaction anyway. Plus, I also think that this focus ends up making encounters with other players more meaningful and interesting when it does actually happen. Maybe one time another player will be friendly to you, or another time they'll try to engage in PvP with you, forcing you to fight back or run away. And as I said, because these encounters are more uncommon, I think it makes the game a little bit better. In fact, I think this is what makes the requirement to pair up with other people to take on the Scorchbeast Queen so jarring. After all, you've played through the game mostly by yourself until you hit this giant obstacle that impedes any additional progress. It's a bizarre design choice, and hopefully, Bethesda will stay away from things like this in the future. I think everyone can agree that a single-player game from Bethesda would have been a lot better than what we got. But assuming you do play solo in 76, there is a high probability that you won't run into other players a whole bunch, which I think is a good thing. Number 5. Survival mechanics. One of the better aspects of Fallout 4, which was the survival mode difficulty, got integrated into Fallout 76's primary mechanics, and despite the myriad of other issues with the game, I do think that it would be a good direction to go in for the franchise going forward, and maybe even a few of Bethesda's other games. Granted, Fallout 76's survival mechanics are really dumbed down, and the game's difficulty isn't as difficult as Fallout 4's survival mode, but I do like the resource management aspect. For example, you have to make sure that you're at least somewhat hydrated and fed, and depending on what guns you use, you have to account for how much the ammo you need weighs. It's also kind of neat that you can wear gas masks while in specific areas, as this can really improve immersion. I know there are some people that don't like the survival mechanics, and I do kind of find it annoying when I contract a disease randomly. However, I do think some of these mechanics can be interesting and worthwhile. Mutations are kind of neat, and I wouldn't mind seeing something like that return in a future title. Number 6. The camp. While I guess this is a fairly basic thing to point out, the camp is a great idea, and I wish it was something that was a part of a Fallout 4 DLC, and I hope something similar ends up appearing in future Bethesda titles. The ability to build a base virtually anywhere on the map is really cool, and much like Fallout 4, you can grow crops, store a couple of workbenches for modifying your gear, and put up a few turrets to give yourself a little safe area from PvE monsters. In-game, the camp can also be used and placed strategically to help eliminate or at least reduce your fast travel costs. For example, the player can place their camp near a settlement that they want to get, or near a quest turn-in location to help reduce the amount of overall bottle caps that you have to spend. So I guess from a gameplay perspective, the camp is nice in that sense as well. In general though, I think the camp was a great idea, and while it's limited due to what I can guess are likely server restrictions, it is a great aspect of the game. Especially when compared to Fallout 4, where you either need mods to achieve something similar, or you're stuck with these standard immovable settlements in specific areas of the map. Number 7. New weapons. Though I'm not a huge fan of the weapon/armor level and gear durability systems in Fallout 76, something else that I think Fallout 76 did really well involves a lot of the new and revamped gear designs. It's nice to see some returning favorites from Fallout 3 like the 10mm SMG, the grenade launchers from New Vegas, and I also like many of the new, more historically based weapons like the Gatling gun, black powder weapons, and the single-action revolver. I also like the looks of the newer excavator and ultrasight power armors, and admittedly, I wish many of these items I just mentioned were also in Fallout 4. Though I suppose this improvement is to be expected since Fallout 76 is a quasi-sequel, Fallout 4 didn't really feature all that many weapons, with a subtype like pistols in particular being especially affected. After all, and without DLC, there's really only the 10mm pistol, 44 pistol, and Deliverer in Fallout 4, while in Fallout 76, you get those minus the Deliverer, in addition to 2 black powder pistols, the Western Revolver from Nuka World, and the single-action revolver. So overall, you're getting a lot more variety in Fallout 76 compared to Fallout 4, which is a decent improvement. While I'm not crazy about the return of certain things like the radium rifle, since it feels like it just got copied and pasted from Far Harbor into Fallout 76, I do like a lot of the new weapons/gear designs, and there's certainly a more positive aspect of the game. Number 8. The Enclave. Though I still think it was a pretty bad idea to include the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 76, disagree with me if you wish, I do have to say that I did like to see the Enclave return in this game. The Enclave have always been a really interesting faction to me, and to see them appear in Fallout 76 is pretty cool. And it's also kind of neat that you can actually join them this time around, where in previous games, you can sort of act on President Eden's goals, but you can never really join the faction in Fallout 3. And the same thing goes for New Vegas, where you can ally with some old Enclave remnants, but there's no real faction for you to join since it got destroyed on the West Coast. Being able to join the Enclave this time around is certainly cool, and while Modus kind of reminds me of President Eden in that he's another AI, and I think the story would have been better if the first human characters the player encounters were inside the White Springs Enclave bunker, I'm at least glad that the Enclave made it into the game. Especially since they were teased in a couple of terminal entries and dialogue exchanges in Fallout 4, only to never really make an appearance. If you ask me, I like seeing the Enclave reappear in Fallout 76, and while I definitely do wish different things were done with them, it is cool that you can join them this time around. Number 9. The Bombs. While I definitely take issue with how the quest involving them was designed, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to not only launch bombs in Fallout 76, but to see how it also affects the rest of the in-game environments is definitely a really cool aspect of this game. The ability to transform the in-game environment so radically is really cool, as one minute the location might look like a generic forest, while the next, it's a totally irradiated wasteland with a bunch of dead trees and a dark and ominous reddish-orange sky. I'd also have to say that the changes to the wildlife that occur as a result of the bomb dropping are also pretty cool as well, in that the enemies become a lot stronger and more dangerous. In fact, if Fallout 76 were a single-player game, you could include a very similar mechanic to this, where you launch a bomb at a specific area that could change the aspects of the ending. Maybe you launch it on your own faction that's like the morally good faction, and you get a bad ending, or you launch it at the enemy faction or the evil faction, and you get a good ending. Or alternatively, you can just launch it anywhere on the map, and you can get some really interesting and funny endings out of that. With this in mind, I think incorporating this feature or a similar feature into a future game in some way would be a really great idea. It's definitely one of the better or more interesting aspects of Fallout 76, and hopefully it doesn't get lost with 76's less than stellar reception. And for our final entry, number 10, the photo mode. This is a feature that I'd like to see in future Bethesda titles, and while you can pretty easily get control of the in-game camera in Skyrim and Fallout 4 via console commands, the inclusion of a photo mode in 76 presents the player with additional ways they can manipulate their character for pictures. For example, the player can get their avatar to perform various poses, and you can also change your avatar's facial expressions, which can yield some pretty humorous results. You can also perform poses with mods in Fallout 4, however, having this in a more user-friendly package in the form of 76's photo mode is better in my opinion, and I hope Bethesda will continue to add things like this to their future games. In the end, photo mode is cool, and like I just said, hopefully we'll see it in the future. Okay guys, I think that's going to wrap up this video. If you liked this video, or if you're like me and you think FLUB is a funny word, be sure to hit the like button on this video. Otherwise, and as always, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.